the equilibrium is doing something that's impossible to do. So it cannot qualify as science in the same way as, for instance, natural sciences can. In other words, it cannot make unconditional predictions, because the predictions it makes
influence the future.
Right. So this is actually the key point, one of the key points in the book, that the concept of equilibrium, when applied to financial markets, is actually not a very helpful concept, because you can never attain equilibrium, and you can't even constantly be moving towards equilibrium. Half the time the market moves towards equilibrium, the other half it moves away from it.
Yes.
So, and
it will always sort itself out?
Well, if left to its own devices, actually financial markets would collapse. So, so they are not stable. Yeah. They are not stable. And we have learned it.
But that goes against, I mean, that's an important point to make an interruption. It is, that goes against the grain of what some laissez-faire economists believe, which is that the market will always find its own.
This is actually one of the main points I'm trying to make in the book. Yeah. That we have a false conception of how financial markets operate.
And the false conception is that?
That left to their own devices, they'll move towards equilibrium.
You also believe it's necessary, and this is outlined in this book too, for government to have a significant role in a regulatory way.
Right, but
because markets can't be left to themselves.
Because markets left to their own devices would actually occasionally collapse. And we have learned that because we have had a number of crises in the course of history. And every time you had a financial crisis, you then realize what's wrong and you put in some regulatory mechanism to prevent a recurrence of that crisis. Therefore, you had a different kind of crisis. And that's how actually central banking and the Securities and Exchange Commission and the whole regulatory environment has developed. Now, we have very good institutions now, and we have not had a collapse since the 1930s. However, markets have now become globalized, and we don't have the global institutions adequate for global markets.
And in fact, you're even arguing for a world central bank.
Well, that's right. It would be desirable to have one, but it's a little bit utopian in the present situation.
Well, I understand that, but I mean, what's interesting too about what you argue now is that most of the recommendations for reform are piecemeal and insignificant.
The ones that I make?
No, the ones that are being made.
No, but actually, I feel that...
The same thing about yours too?
I feel that I sort of point towards the kind of reforms we need, but I don't feel that I've really done it. I would have done it if I knew how. But
well, you haven't done it because you didn't know how, you haven't done it because you don't know the answer, and so you're just giving us the best that you have, knowing it's incomplete.
It's incomplete and inadequate. And it's something that I will continue to work on, and I hope that it's not something that I can do alone, of course. Yeah. I hope that there will be a recognition, a general recognition, that we have to develop our institutions. We have to strengthen our international financial institutions. Actually, currently, under the influence of what I consider a false ideology, the effort is to dismantle or downsize the institutions we have.
You mean IMF, you mean
the
World
IMF,
Bank?
World Bank, the International Consultative...
Now, is that because of financial considerations or because of the protest of people that were at Seattle and Washington and Prague and other places?
Well, no, this is actually from the market fundamentalist point of view. Right. This is, let's say, if you read there's a report, a Meltzer Commission, which, let's say, designs an architecture based on the idea that you better leave markets alone, and don't interfere with markets. And the reason we have crises is because there are institutions interfering with the market. So that's the market fundamentalist point of view, which I'm attacking in the book. Now, you also have an attack from the Seattle protesters, and there is this very strange coalition from the far left
Labor
and the far right. Working to destroy the global capitalist system as it currently exists. It actually reminds me, because I'm reading a biography of Hitler. It's there are 2 volumes, 800 pages each, and it reminds me of the Weimar Republic, where you had communists on the one side, far left and far right, and the institutions were too weak to withstand the conflict between these two forces. Right. So in a way, you have this attack from both sides of the system as it currently functions. Now, I think it is actually a very beneficial, or potentially a very beneficial system. So I'm not opposed to capitalism at all. But I would like to reform it to make it viable so that it could actually, we could preserve and build on what we have already gained.
What's the best reform it needs in your judgment?
Well, I think that you need to, let's say, do more in the way of providing incentives to countries that follow good policies, particularly countries at the periphery of the system, to do better. So you have at the moment, at the way the system works now, you have a disparity between the center, where the financial markets are, where all the capital from all over the world, all the savings are sucked up to the center. And then they are supposed to be pumped out to the periphery by the financial markets. Now, since the markets don't operate the way they are supposed to, but they do need to be managed, the management is actually at the center. It's the Federal Reserve and the US Treasury that basically sets the policy for the world. And if we are in trouble, they will take the appropriate measures to prevent a collapse. But when the countries at the periphery get into trouble, they don't get the same treatment. Yeah. So there is a disparity between the position of the periphery countries and the center.
Let me take a look at just recent history, financial history, starting with Mexico. Mm-hmm. Mexico would not have survived without an interruption in the market because the pesos was going down, would have collapsed. Right. Yes?
Right. Well, Mexico is pretty important to us, our neighbor, etc. So we bailed out Mexico. But in effect, it's the Mexican taxpayers that paid the bill. So we provided them...
Because they had to pay the loan back.
They paid the loan back, but then they had a collapsed banking system, and let's say they lost 20% of their GNP, which they have to pay off over a period of time.
And how is the Mexican economy doing today?
Doing a lot better.
Growing at about 4 to 6%?
Yeah, it's doing very well now, but the damage was done, and it did considerable damage at that time, and they are still paying the bill today. So now they're improving, but the disruption occurred. The same thing in the Asian countries.
I was going to go to Asia next because it followed. Yeah. What happened there?
Well, they actually they suffered a very severe recession. They moved out of it. Now things are getting again worse because they are left with the debris of the accumulated debt.
But not
and
in,
they haven't been able to dig themselves out from
Are you
under.
only talking about Japan, or are you talking about China, South Korea, other places, or
I'm
just
talking
Japan?
about